Good morning and welcome to this licensing hearing panel. The first item on the agenda.
Yeah, I'd like to nominate Councillor MacDonald.
Good morning and welcome to this licensing hearing panel. The first item on the agenda is to elect a chairperson.
Yep, thank you. Happy to propose Councillor MacDonald.
Thank you.
And I'm happy to second it.
Thank you.
Thank you, members, and thank you, Julie. We have no apologies for absence. I have no urgent matters by reason of special circumstance this morning. Are there any declarations of disclosable pecuniary interests or other significant interests, members? Councillor Kemp.
I don't know quite how. I'm aware of Councillor Mrs. Tranter being the wife of a former councillor.
Thank you very much, Councillor Kemp. Now, the Licensing Act 2003 application for a new premises licence at Tesco Express, Unit 1, Pullman House 90, Corporation Street, Rochester. I'm going to move for the exclusion of press and public before we do introductions, please. We're not excluding? Okay, no problem.
Good morning. I'm Stephen Hutchins. I'm an objector and as a resident close by to the applicant.
Morning.
Pure while I head up.
Good morning, I'm Jeremy Bark. I'm a solicitor from BCLP representing Tesco this morning.
I'm Mark.
I'm Katie Honeywood, Licensing Officer.
Kyle Rogers, Legal Advisor to the panel.
Julie Francis Beard, Democratic Service Officer.
Councillor Matt Fern, I'm a member of the panel today.
Thank you very much, and I'm Councillor Dan MacDonald, the Chair of the panel. Katie, I'm going over to you to outline the application. Okay, over to you, please.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning. On the 24th of February 2025, we received a new premises licence application for Tesco Express, Unit 1, Pullman House, 90 Corporation Street, Rochester. An appendix of the Cumulative Impact Assessment called Rochester High Street can be found as Appendix A of this report. It is attached for information as the premises is located within this designated area. This can be found on pages 11 to 13. This application is for the sale by retail of alcohol as off sales only, Sunday to Thursday between 10 a.m. and 9 p.m, and Friday and Saturday at 10 a.m. to 8 p.m. The application includes the operating schedule, which details the conditions the applicant is offering to promote the licensing objectives. This applicant has submitted these as a separate document. A copy of the application and the proposed conditions can be found at Appendix B on pages 15 to 33. During the consultation period, we received 4 representations. We received a representation from Public Health on the 6th of March. This was in relation to 2 of the licensing objectives, the prevention of crime and disorder and the prevention of public nuisance. This can be found at Appendix C on pages 35 to 39. We received supplementary evidence from Public Health on the 7th of April. This forms part of the supplementary agenda, Part 1. We received 2 representations from members of public. These can be found at Appendix D on pages 41 to 59. We received a representation from a member of the Rochester City Centre Forum. This can be found at Appendix E on pages 61 to 64. On the 10th of April, we received supporting evidence from the applicant. This can be found in the supplementary agenda Part 2. It is for this panel to decide on the appropriate action for this application, taking into account all the evidence brought to your attention, both written and oral, alongside the Licensing Act 2003 and its associated guidance. The panel can decide to grant the licence as applied for, amend the application, for example, changing the hours, add or amend any conditions, refuse the application. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Katie. Now we're going to go over to the applicant to speak in support of the application. Is that you, Hadish? You're going to start off? Over to you.
I'm grateful and thank you to Katie. What I was going to do with your indulgence was obviously set out a bit of background around Tesco Express before then addressing some of the concerns that have been raised and some of the policy issues, if that's okay. So in terms of Tesco to begin with, and a Tesco Express is the smallest format that Tesco have. It's a format they developed in the late 1980s and it's evolved massively since that point in time. It's designed effectively to allow convenience shops, so for people typically looking to do the next day to a day and a half's worth of shopping. And so there's a whole range of goods within the stores designed to meet and complement that. Alcohol is a small but important part of that, and a typical store will have 5,000 products, of which roughly 100 will be alcohol products where they have where they've been granted a licence. The majority of that will be red and white wine, but it's a very carefully selected range to complement everything else that's within the store. Typically, the average customer will leave with about a bag and a half's worth of shopping. To give you an idea, it's that sort of top-up convenience things. They're typically looking at the next 2 to 3 meals, and everything is designed around that. Tesco likes to think, in fact, before I get onto that, so again, in terms of sales of alcohol, well over 95% of the sales of alcohol within the store are linked to the sales of other goods. And within the typical store, and we have over 3,000 that trade in this format, so fairly statistic, the overall sales of alcohol as a percentage of total sales is well under 10%. So alcohol is not the main thing that these stores do. It's a small, effectively ancillary element to that, a small but important thing that we do. And again, the main purpose of the store is not to sell alcohol. They already separately have planning permission, and that's where the hours are as they are, because people will already be going there to buy other convenience goods, and this is to complement it. So in terms of Tesco, Tesco has about 3,500 stores in total. We like to think that we are an excellent operator. We like to think that we promote best practice, and I'll give you a number of examples of that as we go along. And quite often what Tesco does, the rest of the industry in the sector, both within the off-licence sector, but quite often broadly as a whole, will then follow it. So we take our obligations and responsibilities extremely seriously. We also have a good neighbour policy, and I'll try and describe that for you in a little while. But for every store that we look at, there is an incredibly robust and detailed process that we go through before we even get to a point of thinking about taking a store. So there will be an assessment at head office around demographics, around stats. We will get information from existing stores. So if you've heard from Simon, Simon looks after Medway. He is responsible for the 5 other Tesco Expresses that are in the immediate vicinity. I say the immediate vicinity, somewhere about 8 miles away in terms of this, but within your borough effectively. In terms of some of the policies and processes that we have, and this links through to everything, we have a Think 25 policy. Tesco were the first national company to adopt an age-restricted policy way back under the old legislation, following detailed discussions with the Home Office and ACPO, as it was then, the Association of Chief Police Officers. They've obviously shifted the dial in terms of that. It's now Think 25. Again, I think they were the first national supermarket to move to Think 25. The way it works now is it's linked to a till prompt. So whenever an age-restricted product is scanned, a till prompt will come up saying, Think 25, yes or no. And it requires some form of positive input to either result in a sale or to result in a refusal. The extent to which Tesco look at this, and again others have now copied it, for the last 20 years, that prompt has always had a further thing that appears at the bottom which says a person who was 18 today would have a date of birth of, and it therefore makes it very easy for the checkout assistant when looking at a form of ID to work out whether the person is 18 or not. I mention that just to show the lengths that Tesco go to make sure that they get things right and their systems work. Backed up by point of sale material, it's backed up by audits, it's backed up by extensive training. In terms of audits, as well as what the operations manager and the area manager will do, we have something called Safe and Legal. So every quarter there is a process that Tesco goes through to make sure that all its operations within its stores are safe and legal, and also in adherence with Tesco policies. That requires the store manager and their area manager to literally go through a checklist and make sure that everything is as it should be. On top of that, and we've done this I think for about the last 15 years, we mystery shop within our stores using 18 or 19-year-olds. We can't use 16 or 17-year-olds, we don't have the statutory powers, and they go and try and make test purchases of alcohol. And again, it gives good real-time feedback to the store, it goes to Hardish, it goes to the area manager, we share all that information with the police if they want it. But again, it's another good way of validating what we do. In terms of training, massively comprehensive. Every single member of staff whose role involves the sale of alcohol gets induction training. We typically do refresher training at least every 6 months. It can be done more often if we desire to do it. All our training is now online, supported by other materials, so it's very easy to refresh it as and when we need to. Other members of staff get additional training, so by way of example, the management team will get conflict resolution training, not because we think they are going to need it every day, but it's about giving people the skills they need in order to be able to do their jobs under any circumstances. Again, within the stores on shifts, there will typically be a team meeting where there'll be a handover from the previous shift or a discussion around what the issues are, what they need to watch out for, etc. Some of the training is effectively video-based and scenario-based, so it effectively uses actors or Tesco employees to demonstrate what good looks like and to demonstrate what bad looks like. And the store, as I say, can repeat that as often as they want to. I think the Tesco training is still the only training within the sector that has won the British Institute of Innkeeping Good Practice Recognition Scheme Award. So again, as you know, the BII is the national training body. Again, it shows the lengths to which Tesco go to. This is all backed up by extensive policies that we have. I'm only going to mention 2, but if you want more details, please let me know. We have a very detailed responsible retailing of alcohol policy, which I can sum up very briefly. We encourage, we train and we empower all members of staff to refuse any sale of alcohol where they have any concern whatsoever. There is no incentive as part of that financially to sell alcohol. It's not part of the bonus scheme. In fact, there's a disincentive to make inappropriate sales because on the audit scores, etc., if we're not fully complying, then the store and the team simply won't get their bonuses. That's backed up by probably the most important policy of all of these, which is you say no, we say no. So if a member of staff makes a refusal of the sale of alcohol and a member of the public is then aggrieved by that and complains to the member of the management team, we will back up that refusal in all cases. There is no point training people, empowering people, and encouraging them to refuse sales of alcohol if you are then going to overrule them. A large part of our the people that work in our stores are local as well, and therefore they're invested in the community, they know the areas, and it's part of what we try and do within this format. CCTV, we have colour CCTV. There are fixed cameras on certain locations, always on the tills, always on the entrance, always on the alcohol displays. Other cameras port around. It's linked to something called the hub, which I'll tell you about in a moment. Again, over the years, we were amongst the first to take steps in relation to alcohol. So I think we were one of the first to try and reduce the ABV content within our stores. There's a condition in the proposed conditions you'll find pages 31 to 33, I think that document is at, where beers, lagers and ciders, unless they're premium products, will not be sold with ABVs of 5.5 or greater. Again, we were one of the first to do that. In terms of 4-packs of cans of alcohol, we don't sell beers, lagers and ciders in cans in less than 4 packs. There was a suggestion, I think, within the reps that might encourage street drinking. It doesn't. It's entirely the opposite. It's something we did from head office in consultation with the police and some of the ex-police people that we employ, where actually 4 packs, it's less likely that someone will just go in and, to use the vernaculars, purchase a tinny. And so it's a deliberate design. This is about people wanting to buy alcohol to consume at home or in a legitimate scenario. In terms of displays, I'm not quite sure, but I brought spare copies. The plans don't appear to be in the committee papers. So I have several spare copies which I can hand up because they were definitely submitted with the application, if that's okay. I'm just waiting for everyone to get the plans, if that's okay. Councillor MacDonald.
Just to let you know, they are two different, so we don't want to, you know, we've got
Correct.
a copy here we're having to share, so we're going to have to switch over.
That's not a problem.
So
what I'm going to do is I'm going to stand
that's
up.
okay. If you still talk through it, we're
So if I orient the plan this way, the station's here, Corporation Road Street is here. And so this sits within the wider residential development, and it's literally, it's the ground floor element that abuts direct to the station. Main entrance is here, which I've marked with an arrow, which is just here. You've then got self-service tills here, man tills here, so in close proximity. The area marked behind the tills is where the spirits and champagne will go. And then the proposed displays for alcohol are here. So again, it's fairly standard for Tesco in terms of designing out crime disorder. Tills away from the door, but with a good visibility of the front door. The alcohol displays well away from the front door, again with good visibility. Lots of back of house here. Effectively, you can see from the other plan, I'm not going to dwell on it too much, there are a number of car parking spaces which are within the development, which are both for our customers, our staff, and also where deliveries will take place. But again, you can see from that design, all very well thought out, all very carefully planned, and very similar to what we do elsewhere. In terms of litter, we'll have a bin outside the store. Our cleaners will clean within and without the store on a daily basis. I wish I could promise you that if someone took a packet of crisps and dropped it a mile away, it wouldn't happen, but that actually is personal responsibility and well outside of the store, etc. In terms of staff numbers, we anticipate the store's due to open sometime in June, July, subject to all the fit-out works. We imagine there'll be a management team of 4, so a store manager and 3 team leaders, and then somewhere between 15 and 20 other staff, depending on that part-time, full-time mix. At the busy periods of time, I would imagine there'll be 6 or 7 members of staff working. What we do is we adjust it depending on the patterns of the store. It's something that Simon, together with the store manager, will look at, and they will make sure that we have enough staff working for the needs of the store and to make sure that we can promote all the licensing objectives. And again, some of the other things that I've been saying are either on page 32 or 33 of your condition. All of these things have been enshrined in conditions. We anticipate we will probably open, as we do with most new stores, with some form of security guard. We will then reassess 8 weeks out, and we will end up with the numbers that we need. Key thing is obviously the police have seen all of these conditions. The police do not object in any way, shape or form. In terms of deliveries to the rear of the premises in that car park area that you've seen. In terms of antisocial behaviour, our stance is quite simple. We do not tolerate bad behaviour. If people behave badly, we ask them to stop. If they won't stop, we ask them to leave. If they won't leave, we call the police and we ban them. And we put them in something called a rogues gallery. We share all that information with the police locally. We do this around the country. It works well. We have a fantastic relationship with them. That partly links to something I'm going to come on to in a moment in relation to incidents tagged to a store. Quite often Tesco will apparently have higher stats than others because we will just call things in that we see in the local area. If we see something happening outside the store, we'll call the police and tell them about it. It's, again, part of that good neighbour policy and what we seek to do. Again, as part of the good neighbour policy, we will both raise money for local charities, we will have community boards, we will try to make sure that we are aware of all the key sensitive areas in the locality. Our existing express stores within the Medway area, by way of example, raised just over £80,000 last year for good causes that they then donated. Excuse me one second. Turning next to some of the representations and some of the policy considerations. Clearly the police don't object. They are the key statutory authority in terms of crime disorder. They're obviously one of the key parts of the cumulative impact policy, and if they had any concerns about the application in its current form, they certainly would do. We've had discussions with them. They've obviously also seen reports that Mark has done and various other bits and pieces. The hours that we applied for were very carefully considered in the light of the previous application and comments from the police, and therefore are designed to make sure that alcohol will not be available for sale at any time where there might be some suggestion of a concern. We think that's, coupled with the conditions that we've offered, why they don't object. In addition to that, environmental health don't object. Clearly, they are the key statutory authority in terms of public noise, public nuisance, and again, a key thing. Similarly, trading standards don't object. They are the key authority in relation to protection of harm to children and underage sales, etc. Again, we have good relations with all of them. They know how we operate. We like to think we do it well, albeit we're not complacent about it. In terms of the cumulative impact policy, etc., as your policy quite clearly states, in terms of all of this, and apologies one second whilst I just turn to the relevant pages. Two things in terms of this. Clearly it's not absolute, and secondly, towards the third page of the policy, when you talk about this, it talks about the key aim in Rochester High Street is to encourage and expand the leisure tourism and business visitor offer with the intention of providing premises attractive to all age groups and a diversity of licensed premises, primarily centred on the day and early evening economy. The kinds of application which would be encouraged include restaurants and cafes, not us, premises where the sale of alcohol is ancillary to the main business within Rochester. There is already a lot of housing and regeneration that's taken place the other side of the station. There is a co-op, by way of example, but 100 yards away. It falls outside the cumulative impact policy area. It trades in virtually the same way that we do. There is not a single suggestion or shred of evidence that they cause problems. And again, that's perhaps one of the best comparators. In fact, it enhances the area. That's exactly what we intend to do. If one looks at the statutory guidance in paragraph 14 and onwards, effectively, again, it talks about cumulative impact not being an absolute bar. You have to consider each case on its merits. And it looks at two elements of this. One is it doesn't really attract those premises not like to add to the cumulative impact, and I'll come back to that, or you can demonstrate you won't add to the cumulative impact at all. In terms of the first, we would say we are premises that are not like to add to the existing cumulative impact. Of those 3,000 Tesco Express stores, we probably have 500 that already operate within cumulative impact policy areas and don't cause problems. There are 2 in your borough within the Strood cumulative impact policy area that operates an express. One at Darley Road, one at Finchbury, I'm going to get this wrong, Brinsbury, I almost got it right. But again, they operate well, they don't cause problems. So again, not the type of premises that are likely to cause issues or impact. So we would say, in terms of all of that, we satisfy the test in terms of cumulative impact, but that is then backed up by the fact that the key statutory authorities, who you would expect to object if they had significant concerns, simply do not. Again, you have authority if you're relying on that in the government guidance at paragraph 3.19. It recognises that the police will be the key statutory authority on crime and disorder. It recognises environmental health will be the key statutory authority in terms of public nuisance. There are various cases in terms of relying on the absence of an objection as being strong evidence. So McCall and Kavanagh, I'm not going to produce them, but I know your legal advisor will be aware of them. So all of that, we suggest provides an incredibly compelling argument as to why you should grant a licence. On top of that, you've already had the report, and I know you will have read it, and I'm not going to take you through it in great detail, but there are a few things within it. Mark Holton was slightly being modest when he described himself as a licensing consultant. He helped set up the largest licensing team for the police in the country in Westminster. He was then seconded to the Home Office for licensing on 5 days. He thought that was an appropriate number, and you will see from what the report says what is being suggested excuse me, by some, he simply didn't find that. More importantly, knowing how Tesco operates, the key conclusion from Mark, and I'll get him to confirm that, is that the licensing objectives would not be undermined if you granted this application. They would be promoted, but again, I'll get Mark to confirm that was his clear view.
That was my view.
If you could just turn your mic off, please, Jamie. Mark, can you turn yours on?
Hello? Apologies again. Yeah, I've done my observations, but the important thing for me, really, when you look at the guidance, is the police are one of the more important bodies with regards to cumulative impacts, and they have an objective. And there's a reason that they have an objective is that, in my opinion, the crime and disorder's not there in that immediate area. There are issues, but nothing that allowing Tesco's to sell alcohol would add to. There's no problems with regards to drunkenness in the immediate area. I saw no people loitering. There's no drugs. There's no theft issues. I looked at the co-op as well. I looked at your 3 off licences in the high street. They all seem incredibly well run now, although it is obvious that there has been problems previously, because I did see a lot of police notices in all 3 of those off licences in the high street. So it's obvious that action has been taken against them at some point.
They're somewhat meaningless without the underlying data and wouldn't be reliable as evidence that actual crimes or specific incidents. Again, if you could just expand on that.
One of my previous jobs was that I set up and ran the Westminster Police licensing team. I had 3,500 venues there, and I was always particularly careful when officers had to present evidence at subcommittees or appeal hearings at magistrates with regards to evidence that was tendered. In that, it's all well and good and quite easy for me as an officer to tender 500 crime stats at a venue or venues kindred to it. The problem is with that is that there's not actually 500. You're just saying offences that have been alleged at a venue, and sometimes not even at the venue. Sometimes they're within an immediate area, but because I'll say because Tesco's may be a pivotal venue around there and somewhere that's easier for officers to know and get to, people will say Tesco's, but it's not actually Tesco's. It might be a bus stop that's 300 yards down the road from Tesco's. Also, there is the fact that those crimes have not been resulted from investigation. So it's quite easy to look at an allegation and say that is a crime. It's not a crime because it hasn't been resulted. And it's my humble opinion that when I've looked into crime stats, they are vastly reduced when they're presented properly because a lot of them will have been no further actioned. A lot of them will be that an investigation is still ongoing and therefore there's no result to that. So I would say that to present crime statistics that have not been thoroughly looked into and investigated, it's unfair. That's my opinion.
And again, one of the points you made was that sometimes Tesco might be used as a locator. So when you search this, I think is essentially from the CRIS system. So if you search for Tesco, it will pull up everything in those raw stats. And unless you look at the underlying data, which might then make it clear it was something that Tesco could have reported about people in the surrounding area or whatever it is, as I said, we do before.
That's correct.
So hopefully from all of that, in terms of the objections, we don't criticise the objectors, we understand what they're saying, but I think quite often these are, broadly speaking, what I'd characterise as being fears. The premises aren't open. If you look again at the crime stats and take out 3 key premises, so I think it was 301 in total that has been referred to. 3 of those premises include 2 extras and a superstore, and they account for 226 of those crime stats. That then leaves 75 amongst the Tesco Expresses, which are the closest. So even assuming for a minute, and even within those stats, some of them say theft, other location, whatever that might mean, but clearly not the Tesco. But even including those, that would amount to 75 amongst 5 Tesco Express stores, which is 15 in a year, so just over 1 per calendar month. But listening to Mark, you can't even rely on that. So I would suggest that's indicative of very well-run stores that simply don't cause problems. Again, I'm going to ask Simon one quick question. And apologies for my cold. Simon, in your experience in terms of Medway and the general area, are there significant problems with any stores that you can't deal with or address? I'm very grateful. I realise I've probably spoken for a little bit more time than usual, but given the nature of the application, what was being said, who's there, we just wanted to canter through as much of this as we possibly could. Obviously, we realise you might have some questions, but that is the application. We can hope you see why we've made it. We can hope you can see it's a very well thought out application, and therefore, again, we're not surprised that the main statutory authorities don't object.
Thank you very much, Jeremy. And yes, we understand you've got to put the case over, so with the time limits, there's no problem. I'm going to just ask objectors if there's any questions. Obviously, you're going to put your own objection forward in a moment. But I'm going to ask if there's any questions. Barbara, did you want no questions from you? Sarah?
Sorry. Is there going to be a cash point at on the road?
I think the intention is to have a cash point, just as the co-op does, but I think that's still being signed off with planning. So subject to whether planning approve it or not.
Stephen, over to you. Stephen, can you put your mic on, please?
Sorry, it turns itself off. Would you be able to elaborate how you wish to address the public spaces protection order that's in there? Because that's not being dealt with at any point during the application or in your evidence, please.
100%. So in terms of that, the fact that premises are able to sell alcohol for consumption off the premises is not inconsistent with that. Our core market and what we're selling people to do is for people who are living or working in the area so that they can buy alcohol that they can then consume with food. So we operate many premises within localities where such orders are in place, and we support those and it doesn't cause problems. In fact, we have a number of premises in Cambridge where there are vast open spaces close by, and the store works very, very hard. If we realise that there is a problem in practice, we'll speak to the police and we will ban people from being purchasing alcohol, etc. If there is any fear on the part of the staff that people are going to street drink, or it's young kids or whatever it might be, they simply won't sell them the alcohol in the first place. So the very fact that there is such an order in place doesn't automatically mean it's mutually exclusive to having off-licence in the area. Similarly, you can see that there are 4 existing off-licence within the area. From what Mark was looking at and seeing, he couldn't really see any street drinking or any problem drinking. I think he mentions in his report one incident where outside one of the stores, there was a group of 3 fairly young people, probably early 20s, and one of them had a can of beer and was drinking, but not doing so in an antisocial behaviour. Yes, that was in breach, etc., but that was the only instance that was seen. Again, in terms of Tesco and the range of alcohol that we sell and the types of alcohol we sell, we don't think that's inconsistent, and our national experience would support that.
But the public spaces protection order, you're referring to, it's generally homelessness or rough sleepers that, is why that policy exists. That policy is actually in place for general people. So what do you intend to do to address that element?
I was addressing it more generally. I mean, in terms of anyone who wants to drink in public spaces, we don't think that's inconsistent. And there is, firstly, there's an area of an element of personal responsibility. So people should behave and should adhere behind things. But if we become aware or we suspect that people are going to drink in public, we simply won't sell them the alcohol. It doesn't matter whether they what their background is, etc. So clearly if it was someone who's homeless or a street drinker, we wouldn't be selling them alcohol in the first place. If it was anyone else, then we would make judgment calls in terms of the sale, but we would get real-time feedback as well in terms of everything. I've realised I meant to mention one other thing, and again this is fairly critical. So with your indulgence, one of the other things we did in terms of best practice over the last 5 years is we created something called the hub. So within each region we have a hub area where there is a support team for all the Tesco Expresses. So that comprises of people that are there 24/7 who can port into our CCTV, they can port into the tannoy system, they can control the front door and lock it. But as part of that we have area guarding as well on top of the security guarding. So there is a team of people who are employed at all times when our stores are open, and if there is an incident they can be called out to deal with it and address it. Their typical response time is 15 minutes. Obviously, it will depend on traffic and depend on various other things. But again, it's a further support. If there happened to be something outside a store where people are congregating, we could equally call that. But I get the point you're trying to make. Our experience around the country. So you're talking about people who street drink. Reading is probably a good example of some work we did with the police, where there were various orders that were put in place because culturally there were certain parts of the community that like to sit on benches and drink. And we did an awful lot of work. Hardeesh was involved in that. We have stores that sell alcohol, and it simply doesn't cause a problem because we know who the people we shouldn't sell alcohol to are, and it's entirely consistent with that. It presents a further thing to be aware of, entirely right. It's a further thing that we have to address, but it doesn't mean that there's a sort of a mutual exclusivity between the two things. It just means you have to work harder at it.
In relation to the supplementary evidence from the report on the several days visited, and I've been on the other end of that, so I understand what it is like plodding around collecting that information. Just to be clear on that day, it is correct that it was brutally freezing cold. Is that not correct when you did your report?
Not on all days, but yes, there was one brutally freezing cold day. Yes, that's
I'll get
correct.
to my point to save us all some time. Were you aware in checking before you made the statements within your report that rough sleeper protocol was in force, that had swept up all the elements of concern before that report was submitted?
I was not aware.
One other question that hasn't been demonstrated within the evidence is that Rochester Railway Station currently carries 1.72 million passengers. And I can definitely see why you'd want a store on the footprint that you are. I'm a commercial person, I understand it. But with that Pacific there, and the level of trade, do you really think you've got enough resources to manage that footfall? Because the report presented paints a very timid picture of the area when we're talking about an exceptionally highly trafficked, busy area with issues in the community where SIPs and PC, public spaces protection orders, already exist.
Sorry, Joe. Stephen, I'm just going to, just a slight reminder, remember from a licensing perspective, the resourcing of the premises isn't what we look at necessarily. We're interested in the SIP and the impact from licensing. I'm not saying it's a relevant question, I'm just making both parties aware the resourcing isn't our exact, but I do get where you're going with it. I just didn't want to get lost into that part if we can.
No problem, I understand that, Councillor. What the point, I'm just trying to define my issue is that it's about having the correct amount of resources for the volumes there to uphold the licensing objectives.
So probably going to give you a longer answer than you might expect, but absolutely we do. And in terms of this type of location, close to major transport hubs, it's not unusual for us. And again, I'm not being complacent, but we have a wealth of experience. We operate stores closest to some of the busiest transport hubs in London, close to Waterloo Station, close to Euston, close to King's Cross, and we do so well. We will look at the need for security guards. I've already said we assess that. If there was to be a need for permanent security guards, then we would do it. I'll give you a great example of where we do that around the country as an example of why the risk assessment process is the appropriate way to go. There is one of the most affluent places in the country called Ascot. For 51 weeks of the year, it is very benevolent and we have no need for security. For 1 week of the year, large parts of the rest of the country descends upon it to go to the races. And on that week, throughout the whole of the trading day, we have 2 security guards. Not because we have a condition on the licence, but because that's what we do. And there are examples of that around the country as to what we do. We've also got the hub and the area security guarding. We've also got the experience, and we have looked at what happens with the co-op. It's not a million miles away from the station. I accept you will say that this is much closer to the main thoroughfare on Corporation Road. But again, within a very short stone's throw, I've walked around the area personally, I've looked at the whole surrounding area. You have lots of residential elements, but you have the co-op probably 3-minute walk from the station if you go under the underpass. You literally go under, it's there on the left. There is not a single suggestion that it causes any problems. And again, updating what Mark did, we've all walked around the area quite recently. Simon obviously knows the area in terms of rough sleepers and everything else. We didn't have a problem with that. But most importantly, I think in all of this is we are incredibly confident. We wouldn't have made the application if we thought we couldn't promote the licensing objectives. So do the police, so do environmental health, and so do trading standards. If they had any concerns whatsoever, given that these are located within a cumulative impact policy area and within a PSCO area, then they would have objected, and they simply do not. Now, the work that we've put in, it's both the application in terms of framing the hours and the conditions, but also more nationally, the work that Tesco does in terms of getting things right, is why we are, one, confident, and two, we think that they don't object. Again, to give you a little bit more background around that, Hardish does an awful lot of work both for Tesco but also with other operators. So I'm sure you'll have heard of CAP, Community Alcohol Partnership. Hardish sits on the main board of that, has worked with them for over 15, 20 years. That organisation, that body is clearly designed to make sure that where alcohol is being retailed, it doesn't cause a problem to the local area. We were the first national supermarket back in, I think, 2002, 2003, to get involved with them and did projects in Cambridge, in Brighton, all over the place. So I hear exactly what you're saying, but those are issues that we are also aware of and take seriously. And therefore, if we didn't think we could manage them properly and promote the licensing objectives, we simply wouldn't be sitting here today. We have many stores that operate in far more challenging locations, and we do so well. There are areas in the country where we look at it and we think the issues are so significant we simply don't apply for a store. So it's not simply a case of we will just take any site, we won't. There is a very thorough and detailed process that involves lots and lots and lots of people at Tesco head office. Some of them are ex-police officers, some of them deal with health and safety. There's Hardish and her team, and we liaise regularly with the Home Office and various other bodies so that we can be confident that what we're doing is appropriate, remains appropriate, and if we need to do more, then we seek to do more before other people tell us to do so.
You talk of your good neighbour scheme, and just now you referenced liaising, etc. I'm sure you're aware of the Act, like I am, about reaching out and consulting with people. Why didn't you consult with me when I made an objection between now, and did you consult with any other objectors as well?
So I think there's probably two elements to that. So the good neighbour policy operates when the stores are obviously up and running, etc. In terms of liaising with people, there are two ways to do this. Tesco used to liaise extensively 15, 20 years ago, and quite often local residents would complain at the hearing saying we felt intimidated. So rightly or wrongly, the approach we now take is we make the application, then we'll look at what the reps are and engage accordingly and respond to that. It's not to say that we couldn't have done that, but that's the approach, rightly or wrongly, we take nationally, because we would far rather be criticised for not necessarily liaising with people rather than thinking it was big bad Tesco, which isn't the case. Tesco is not big and not bad in terms of that phrase, but that's the approach that we take. I can understand, you might have said, I would have preferred to have been liaised with, but that's the approach that we've taken after very, very careful consideration. I've been at hearings I can remember where we did some extensive liaison, and it was one of the big issues that came up at the hearing where people said we'd rather they hadn't. So to some extent, you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. That's the approach we take.
But on the specifics of promoting the Act and the law, you're telling me that I wrote specifically in my objection to you, please contact me. I am more than willing, under the scope of the Act as required, to liaise and consult with you, and you brushed me off and decided not to listen to me or talk to me further.
I don't think that's a fair characterisation, and obviously you put that in your rep. By the time we get the rep, it's after the period, it's already set in stone, and so there's not an awful lot more that can be done. I can't say anything more than that, but any suggestion that Tesco have pursued an application that's inappropriate or that policy is wrong is simply not accepted. We think that this is a proper application. There was liaison with some of the statutory authorities. We think that is a better way to go. If you think that's wrong, I understand where you're coming from. I respectfully disagree, but it's one of those where, as I say, it's as long as it is broad. You might feel aggrieved if you do. We can only apologise for that, but this is the approach that we take.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, objectors. I'm going to ask the panel for questions now. Councillor, yeah, you come back in.
Yeah, sorry, Chair. I was just waiting to hear everything that the other objector had said. I've got about 3 or 4 questions I'd like to ask. Thank you. The rest of it has been covered by the objector's questions and your answers. Thank you.
Can I just check? Have you got a query on this?
I also don't know what's going to come, but clearly the gentleman who's here, I'm happy to hear the questions, didn't make a rep. He's appearing as a witness, and that was just the point I was making in the sense that if it's perhaps done through mistrant or whatever it might be, but on one level I don't have a particular problem, which is making the point that we're happy to hear the questions, but technically this gentleman didn't make a rep.
I'm just going to check with Carl on that, because I do understand Mr Webb has come with Ms Tranter. Carl, over to you where we decide to go.
Yes, it's correct that objectors should ask questions, witnesses should answer them.
So Chris can ask? No. Okay. So we leave that. Okay. Sorry, Mr Webb, we can't because you're assisting Ms Tranter. Panel, Councillor Fern.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you for your application and for sort of the further information you give us today. Obviously, we know Tesco's is a large company. You're used to dealing with this. You're used to operating in this manner. And personally, I feel confident that you do the right thing. And you're a responsible retailer. No question about that. I just want to pick you up on the Think 25 policy that you mentioned, and only because you mentioned it, and the mystery shoppers. So there's obviously been many occasions when you've done that on your stores, and has alcohol ever been sold? And if so, what happened? And also, does the till record that information, and what do you do with that information? How do you retrain your staff from that?
So if I have first stabs, if you see sort of an expression to my right, your left that's frowning, then I'll hand over to Hardish. But generally as a position, we use an external company, so the company will then report back, and the company will report back essentially via 3 channels. So one is to Hardeesh and her team, but it'll go direct to Hardeesh. Secondly, it will also go to Simon, and thirdly to the store manager. So where we get refusals, etc., where we get a failure to refuse when we should have done, clearly it's not going to be a breach of the law because they're 18 and 19, but it's still a breach of the policy. So we will look at that carefully. Quite often we share all that data with the police as a matter of course. If the police want us to, we don't hide any of that. But then what Hardeesh will do together with Simon, the store manager, is work out what that means. So do we need to refresh all the training? And that's very easy to do, and we can do that. Do we need to have one-on-ones with the individual that refused the sale of alcohol? Or do we need to do something else? And so there are lots of initiatives that Hardeesh has done over the years. It might involve giving people T-shirts that remind them of the policy, or doing some sort of event just to raise awareness. The other thing we can do is we have something called Team 5. So Team 5 is, trying to think how to explain this in the briefest possible way. It's a bit like a newsletter that's produced from a head office but supplemented by the store. So it both contains news but also key messages. So within that, we could include things around failure, even though it wasn't a failure, and what we then need to do. So there's a whole wrapper of things that might happen with that mystery shopping. Clearly, you would hope that with the way that the till prompt goes, and it reminds people that people are engaged and they're going to do the right thing, there might also be a degree of subjectivity. And again, the law recognises that. So if the person who made the sale genuinely thought that person was over the age of 25, that would be something that in the follow-up that we would pick up, and we might try and question that and see whether we agree. We'd obviously take them through the CCTV, what were you thinking, what were you doing, etc. So there is quite a detailed process that goes sort of around the back end of that. Anything you want to add?
So there's an investigation that takes place as well. So for failure to follow our Think 25 policy. So the store is sent this bespoke training for this type of a fail of our Think 25 policy. So, and everybody else, everybody in the store would go through that, not just the individual that made the sale. And then there's follow-up tests. So there's more tests so that we are happy that that store is following Think 25.
Oh, brilliant, thank you for that, and it's good. It's reassuring that you do that. So moving on a little bit then. So and you made reference in your application and in the paperwork that typically less than 12% of your sales are for alcohol. Why is it so important for this application?
So 2 or 3 different reasons, and the reason I say typically is there's one store that's the outlier. So we have a store that's next to Lord's Cricket Ground, and that's slightly unique. So that's the one that's kind of the outlier. A couple of reasons. So firstly, people know what a Tesco Express is generally, and because they're doing their convenience shops, and most customers, not all of them, will be looking to buy, say, the next couple of meals. Alcohol is quite often an important part of that, and therefore it's not only about the alcohol sales, but the link sales to that as well. It's about that composite offer. And so if you're buying, say, I don't know, a starter, a main, a dessert, you might want a bottle of wine to go with that. And again, everything within the store is very carefully profiled in terms of what's the right offer, in terms of wines or even beers or whatever it might be. And so it's a key and important part of what we do and what our traditional customers expect. Clearly within here and within this locality, a large part of the drivers we were approached by the landlord. We came to a deal to take the store. So there are actually residents within the building who are expecting, and I'm sure I can't speak for the landlord in terms of what he said is going to be available, but we'd anticipate lots of people both within that building and the surrounding area are going to want to come and use our store and purchase alcohol, but subject to all those controls, just as they do at the moment from the co-op, which says Stones Throw. Yes, technically it's outside the CIP, but it's kind of, we are literally right on the edge of the CIP as well in terms of that. So that's why it's important. And as I say, if we didn't think we could operate a location with the benefit of a premises licence, we wouldn't take the location typically. And I think of our 3,000 stores, there are probably less than 50, probably significantly less than 50, less than 20, that don't sell alcohol. And quite often that's because it's in a specific area where there might be some covenant, so places like Bourneville, or where the landlord has said, we don't want you to sell alcohol, but we want you to do the other things. And so these are in a variety of locations, some of them where there are areas of deprivation, and it's about having the right staff, the right policy, the right training, and effectively just being vigilant at all times. But that's why we'd like to sell alcohol from this store.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. And as I said, sort of when I sort of first started speaking, was I feel confident that you do the right thing. Picking up on the next point, so happy for anyone to challenge a policy, and you did sort of lead a bit of challenge to our policy, and thank Mark for his report. Very detailed report, and obviously took the time to do all of that. But in the past, there have been many issues in the area, and this is the reason we put the policy in place. Possibly part of the reason that Mark, you didn't find any evidence of this or sort of anything that was not right at the time was because of the time that you'd done it, because of as I highlighted the weather conditions, maybe the time, I don't know, February, maybe if it was a different time it would have been a different point, but it might have played a different sort of factor in the results you got. But yeah, for me, the policy is there, and it's there because we've had issues in the past. And you knew the policy was there when you put the application, or you put the application in, or you looked to take the land on. So I just, I don't know if you could just explain a little bit more around sort of having known that, and I know you've made the reference to the co-op, but really, why should, as I said, I'm confident you're doing the right thing, but why should I support your application today? So, for me,
others might want to add to it from a sort of less legalistic perspective, but certainly from my perspective, so clearly those policies are never absolute, and your policy reflects that. And in fact, your policy reflects it's actually slightly less strict than the Section 182 guidance, and it's quite clear that it will actually seek to, notwithstanding the cumulative impact policy, encourage any type of operation that is complementary to the area and what it's seeking to do, to attract people who are living, working, visitors, etc., etc., etc. So again, understanding that policy and knowing about it, and you'll see on page 31 our rationale behind the conditions and what we took into account, we don't think it's inconsistent with it. And not only do we not think it's inconsistent with it, but clearly the police don't, clearly environmental health don't, clearly trading standards don't. And I know I keep referencing this and mentioning that, but that's quite important. So you will full well know, and with the application that we withdrew, which had slightly longer hours, if the police had concerns, they'd object. And so just because there is a policy there, it doesn't mean that automatically there can be no new premises licences. What it means is that you've got to give it additional careful consideration in the light of that policy, and whether you're happy as a result of that to say, actually, these premises are not going to add to the existing cumulative impact, or they're not likely to, but actually within your policy and why it's slightly watered down from the Section 182 guidance and why it references that, is it actually talks about we won't grant applications to premises that can't show they're going to promote the licensing objectives. We would hope that from what we've said today and what everyone knows about Tesco, that we've demonstrated that in spades. And again, I'm going to bang on about it. The very fact that police don't object in cumulative impact terms is a fairly big deal, because if they had specific concerns about this, and they really about crime disorder, which is the large driver for cumulative impact policies, they would be here and saying, please don't grant this application. And they don't. But for us, we've also got the experience in Strood over the river, not a million miles away, slightly different area. In some respects, I know speaking to Simon, Simon's a local, Simon looks after this area, possibly slightly more challenging. But we have two expresses in that cumulative impact policy area, and they trade well, they don't cause problems. Even looking at the stats that have been produced in here, taking all the comments I made before, but taking the high point, they're not huge stats in terms of that. It's probably on average to say just over one a month, etc. So again, knowing that and drawing from all that experience, we looked at this site in this location, and actually in that new redeveloped, regenerated area, for want of a better phrase, that's exactly the sort of area that we want to be, and we know that we can do it well. So we think it's consistent. I don't know if Hardish or Simon's got any comments as well.
I was only going to add that we do have other stores that have opened in a CIP area, and I stay really close to them as well. So we've got shops in Brighton, stores in Nottingham, and I stay close to those stores just to make sure that there isn't anything that's starting to emerge, because anything that does, we want to nip in the bud and get it sorted early on. And also, the last thing I want to be doing is being up in front of you because the police aren't happy with the way we're operating and that we are starting to add to the area. So I don't want to have any licences reviewed. So, you know, it'll be a shop that I will keep a very close eye on going forward.
And again, just on that, I would say at least 50% of your time is spent in the field, probably more than that, probably 3/4 of it. So Hardy, she's not just office-based, she's out visiting all Tesco stores around the country where she needs to.
Thank you, Jim. Councillor Kent?
I've got no question.
Councillor Fern asked a few of mine. We tend to do that. And there are a few things I want to ask. I suppose for me, you keep referencing the co-op. That's my first thing, and the co-op is out for our purposes. It's outside the SIP. It's outside, and I know you keep mentioning it, and I understand why. So, but I just want to reinforce that that is not in the SIP area. So we keep mentioning the co-op. The other thing I do want to talk about, I like Councillor Fern, I get you take your obligations seriously. Of course you do. You take your staff obligations seriously. That's clear, you know. However, for a licensing committee, we look at the community, not just the staff. I suppose you keep mentioning, I'd just like to ask you, you keep mentioning the police. I'm not against this. But obviously you know, Jeremy, that the police are partners of a SIP. They sign up to the SIP. So when this went to full council, they were full partners and they agree with the SIP. And you would know this, Mark, they agree with our SIP policy in all areas of Medway. So I know we keep saying they're not here today, they're not objecting, but they do sign up to our SIP. Do you want to just comment on that?
Yeah, sure. So I don't think those two things are, again, mutually exclusive. So clearly, if there is an area that has existing problems or is developing those problems, the police are going to start talking about that in their partnership with you as the local authority and with all the other stakeholders in the area, be it the community, be it other statutory bodies. And clearly they provided a lot of statistical evidence when you redid the cumulative impact assessment, I think in 2023, in the last 2 years anyway, 2 or 3 years or so. So that therefore means that what the police are effectively saying, and again Mark will nod his head or shake his head subject to what I say, is it's about having an extra control in place so that if there are any premises that come forward that are going to be problematic, it makes it very easy to refuse that application if the police come in and say, absolutely not, you're not promoting the licensing objectives, you haven't addressed this, you haven't addressed that, you haven't addressed the other. And so in terms of that, as I say, it's about having an extra restriction or safeguard in place, but that doesn't mean that it's absolute, because if it was absolute, the police would object to every single application. And clearly you will have had applications that have been before you where someone's applied within the SIP and the police are here saying it's contrary to the policy and they haven't satisfied us that they are not going to touch upon the things which would like to be an exception. Whereas in this case, they've looked at the hours, they've looked at the conditions, looked at everything else that has been done, and effectively, I don't want to put words in their mouth, but the logical conclusion from this is, given how the application is framed now and what you're doing, and knowing Tesco as we do, and your experience in Medway, we don't object to this because we don't see that you are not going to promote the licensing objectives from this location and this locality. And so, as I say, that's why I keep mentioning the police, because as you rightly said, and as I've acknowledged all the way along, they are a key partner when it comes to cumulative impact policy. They always have been, from day dot. And again, I'm sure Mark could give you many examples from Westminster, who's also at Richmond, where they've got cumulative impact and what the police stance is. But the very fact that they don't object is quite a big deal for an applicant within a SIP, because it means that they effectively are saying, from a crime disorder perspective, we don't see it. It's not going to cause a problem.
I think my question was around the clarity to you of we're not excluding the police from this SIP process because they are a partner of our SIP process, and that's very clear. You know, we keep excluding them. I understand why you're doing. I understand why you're saying it, Jeremy. But for clarity for the panel and for members here today, they are a strong partner of our SIP process. You don't need to add on to that. I just wanted to clarify
100%.
that. Mark, can I just ask you some questions, please? I think I understand your background. You know, I've read it's a very strong background. I'm just going to go back to the days that you done your observations. It is clear, and you've heard already, and Councillor, one of the objectors and Councillor Firm, we had our SWEP in implementation at that time. So we had our severe weather protocol in place. And a severe weather protocol in Medway means that all our homeless people are supported and put in accommodation. We have all our clubs available. So we would have made sure during those freezing cold times that there wouldn't have been people on the street as best we can. So on those days that you observed, and if it's freezing cold, let alone residents, let's not just talk about the homeless, but residents as well. If it's a freezing cold few days, freezing cold or cold, whatever we want to put the temperature down to, you're not going to see many people, are you, around in doorsteps, walking along the street drinking, are you, on them days?
I'm going to say it was cold. That might be with me being a Dower Northerner, I don't know, but I will say it was cold. What I will say is this. I am surprised because I didn't see much streetwise with regards to what I would expect to see if such an initiative was in place with regards to local authority personnel, police officers, combing those streets. I was surprised about the lack of people up and down the high street and the commercial street on an authority side of things. So to say that this protocol was in place, I probably expect a little bit more, Councillor. And I'm not being detrimental in any way. I'm just saying that I didn't see any of those things. Can I just say with regards to, am I allowed to just mention something on what you mentioned about the SIP as well, Councillor, as well? Because it's a subject matter that I've got a little knowledge in, because I actually helped set up the SIP in Westminster, and then I was seconded to the Home Office for 2 years, and I did the 182 guidance with regards to SIPs as well. And I think we're not saying that the police are not an important part of your SIP process. What we're saying is there's always two sides to this, because it was very easy for me as a police officer just to put an objection in and say, I fully agree with the Council's cumulative impact policy. Full stop. Fantastic. A great objection for me to make. But that hasn't been done. So it's all well and good as having a SIP that's supported by the police, but it's also another matter, have we received anything from the police saying that we're objecting on the basis of the SIP, full stop? Because that was an easy one for me. And yes, we have signed up. We should also be objecting on top of that as well, saying, yeah, we're reminding you that we're supporting your SIP, and that's not been done. I'm sorry for mentioning that one, Councillor. I just felt I had to mention it.
I've just realised I may have come across from what Mark was saying and what your questions were, is if you think I'm saying in any shape or form that the police aren't important in all this, it's exactly the opposite point, is the police are critical in terms of SIPs, etc. And therefore the fact they don't object to this application is huge in one sense, in the sense that I fully recognise they're a huge partner and they support the cumulative impact policy. And if I didn't explain this quite clearly enough, the big point I'm really making is, notwithstanding all of that, they don't object to this. So they're happy with it, in the sense of, they're not saying we should do away with the SIP or do away with any of the other policies, but having regard to it and something they clearly supported, they still think, in their view, from their perspective, you can grant the application. That was the basic point.
I wasn't saying for 1 minute, Jeremy, that you was discounting the police. I wanted to, for clarity purposes, to make sure you knew and you agreed that the police were an important part of the SIP process. That was my just back to you. Just if you just turn your mic off, there, yes, Jeremy. Just back to you, Mark. Just for thank you for your comments. We are pretty good in Medway. It's about having shelters. It's about having lunch and breakfast clubs open. It's about supporting them inside, rather than supporting them and walking down the streets. But you would have seen all across Medway officers looking for people that were vulnerable or homeless and making sure they were being supported. The lack of you seeing them, I would suggest, was that we were doing the job right on the day because it was cold. So thank you for that. Can I just ask you about the FOI that was done regarding crime? I do get what you're saying. It's not always in the point of, or like right outside the store. Are we saying that there's no issues at any of our stores in Medway? There's never internal with customers inside or outside. I'm looking at you because you know, Simon. So I'm looking at you, I suppose. You have no issues in any of the stores or outside the stores? Is it always at the bus stops or outside? And I'm just using that quite lightly, Mark. It wasn't that we all think it's at bus stops, but where would you like to comment? Because, you know, we are local, we are in Medway, we know what goes on.
Yeah, look, it would be wrong to say that there's no issues. Absolutely, there are issues, but we see far greater issues in other parts of Kent than we do in Medway. Medway is not one of those parts of Kent that we look at as a particular problem.
So when you say issues regarding the alcohol, or issues regarding refusal, issues regarding people outside that have been drinking, etc.? What
very,
issues do you
very
have in
few
Medway?
of the issues are related to alcohol. The vast majority of the issues would be related to theft.
So what ones are that you know of in Medway have been related to? Can you are they so few and far between you wouldn't be able to tell me
Yes,
any?
I couldn't
any
tell you. Yeah,
any
very,
in the Medway
very,
towns recently?
very, very minimal.
So back to you, Mark. You wasn't saying that the police data coming back was incorrect, was you? Because they gave an FOI, they gave data, they gave information back about incidents in all our stores, which were clear, and whether they were in a vicinity or just outside, the police, the FOI was focused outside the Tesco or by the Tesco. I understand the big Tesco's as well. How would you describe the police information, the FOI, on them incidents?
Quantity was probably correct. Quality, I will say, definitely not correct, because those need to be looked at. And it's, if people ask as a result of an FOI crimes with regards to a given locale or area, that's what they're going to get. They're going to get printed off, redacted where they need to be, and sent out. That's what's going to happen. But they need to be presented at a committee or a magistrate's court or a Crown Court. They need to be presented properly, and they need to be thoroughly investigated to make sure that they are relevant to that venue, or that they were actually a crime. Because some of these that have been crimed, there'll be allegations of crime, they won't be resulted. They might still be being investigated. There might have been no further action, but until we know that, it's unfair to present them.
So in your knowledge, Mark, and I'm not asking you to put yourself on the spot, so don't worry, I'm not out of, because you have got such that big background there, with the numbers that we had on that FOI, you're saying quality, and I get that, although I would argue if some of them were in the big Tesco's with its own car park area, you're talking about in their premises and in their area, you're not talking about on the street, but we're looking at the expresses. What would you say from a quality data point of view? Would you half that number?
I can't really do that, to be honest with you. But what I will say to you is this. I could give you a little example. Westminster's #1 venue always for crime was Selfridges. Is it my worst venue? Was I looking to close it? No.
I understand that, and I understand you saying, Jeremy, you can't really answer that. So obviously the committee looks at the figures we've got in the FOI. Because my question, I wasn't trying to lead Mark into an answer, because I did say at the very beginning it's not scientific, and I wasn't asking you to put yourself on the spot, because we haven't got the police here to answer that. But I was just trying to get a feel from it. So by not trying to get a feel for it, we take the FOI as that information we have to use. Not saying it's correct, but as the information we will use today. Jeremy, I just want to come back to you on my final point. My final point's about engaging your community. Now, you're planning to open a store in historic Rochester. It is a special place. The whole of Medway is special, but it is a special place. We have a lot of significant events there, a lot of stuff that goes on that's really important to the Medway towns and to history and everything else. I know you said I know that other supermarkets have different ways of doing it, and Tesco's decided not to engage with the local community. And I'm Gillingham, so I'm going to say all our areas are very good at talking, but Rochester is very connected. It has its Historic Rochester Society it has so many different organisations that you could have done it in a different way to consult and just to start talking to them, not in a big bad way, as you said. I know Tesco's isn't a big bad, but sometimes consultation can be heavy. Do you not think it's a mistake that without that prior consultation and chat into local community and discussion on what you actually do and how you manage your under 25, all of that stuff, do you not think it's a mistake that you're not getting that out in communities as tight and as special as Rochester?
I generally don't think it's a mistake, and obviously the licence application isn't the only thing that happens with the store. So there's already been a planning application, so it's not as if there isn't other engagement, and there will be separate engagement when it mobilises. But in terms of licensing, this process and what we're doing here is supposed to be part of the whole discussion and the format. And it's something that Tesco's taken as a view over many years, where it has submitted hundreds, if not thousands, of applications, that on balance, it would far rather be criticised for not having done pre-engagement, because this is in itself is engagement, and there was the whole purpose of the Act, I suppose, to the old magistrates' court system, than be criticised for being sort of somehow inequality of bargaining position and being this big corporate that was bullying, etc. So I get entirely the point you're making, but I don't think there's a simple and easy answer. And this is the engagement, etc. I've got one tiny point on the stats I was going to come back to. So obviously within the police there are different databases, and there are several different databases that they keep. So what they'll typically use and sort of release in relation to the FOI request is from the sort of the CRIS reports, which is just these high-level incidents associated with a venue. Now, I've been doing this for a while, and when you then actually, if the police were producing those stats, I'd ask for the underlying data, and it would literally by date, what happened, details. And when I've done that, in many cases, you can either knock it out as being not relevant to the store. Some cases, it will actually be a positive thing, where, and again, I've seen this, where the store is reporting there's a problem with whatever outside the venue. There's nothing direct to do with them, but it's tagged to Tesco, and some of the other stuff is just irrelevant. So again, give you an example. There was a nightclub premises called the Warehouse that I dealt with in a place in Gloucester, and in the stats the police produced in relation to what was going on with it, one of the stats, when we looked at the underlying data, Warehouse had been put in as the search item. And so 5 of the incidents in the underlying data were the Carphone Warehouse, which were clearly nothing to do with that. And all I'm saying is I can't tell you from these figures what those issues are and how you can weigh them. If the police had been here and they're not, they might have done that. And so that's the broad point, is they're just not very reliable.
Yeah, before I go to the objectives now, I suppose from my point is that, you know, an FOI was put to the police, a clear question was asked, and the data come back. I understand the background to it, but the police were asked a simple question about the data. We're not here to pull the data apart because we haven't got their data analysts here to talk about that, and they probably could pull it to bits. But it's just for the sake of our committee. Before I pass to objectives now, it's the sake of our committee that we just have to go by the document in our pack, and we have both different views on that. Barbara, here's the first objector, please. Thank you very much. Thank you, members.
Thank you, Chair. So first of all, I'd like to make a couple of very general comments about the area, and then I'll go into the representations that the Director has made. So firstly, I'd like to remind you that the cumulative impact assessment was reviewed and renewed in May last year. The policy was agreed by you, the Licensing and Safety Committee, and by the full Council. It is current. It's less than a year old, and the evidence supporting it is less than a year old. Evidence was provided by responsible authorities, residents and businesses in Rochester. I'm talking specifically about Rochester now, and this showed that the number of licensed premises has led to issues of street drinking and associated crime, disorder and nuisance, as well as other more hidden related alcohol harms. And I really want you to take this on board, because domestic abuse is a hidden harm. It is very linked to alcohol consumption, and it is an issue in this area. And the evidence provided by the police supports that. And while Rochester has a very thriving nighttime economy, it's got the main nighttime economy in Medway,
Many of the issues highlighted in this area by the evidence, such as street drinking and the associated antisocial behaviour, take place throughout the day, hence the inclusion of off-licence premises in the policy. It's also really important to note that while Rochester High Street, as I've said, is a thriving business area with lots of shops, cafes, pubs, restaurants, it is also densely residential, as you will know. Literally hundreds of people live on the High Street, specifically on the High Street, for example, in the Providence and the flats next to City Wall pub, but there's lots of flats and over the business premises along there. And there are many, many more in the immediate area along the roads leading to and from the High Street, such as Crow Lane, Vines Lane, there's the cathedral, which is surrounded by residents. And am I still on? Yes, I am. And specifically for this premises along Corporation Street and on the other side of the railway line, which isn't in the SIP area, but is in the general area as well. All the new Riverside developments, there are a lot of people there. And this means that there are many people affected by the issues caused by alcohol consumption, both in the policy area and the surrounds. So getting on specifically to the representations made by the Director of Public Health, the evidence used to support the cumulative impact assessment was of alcohol-related crime, disorder and nuisance, and was supplied by both Kent Police and Public Health. And while the police are the lead authority in the area, in these areas, crime, disorder and nuisance are public health issues. And the Director of Public Health is completely entitled to comment on and make representations on these two licensing objectives. I would like to refer you to pages 36 and 37 of the agenda, where the Council Business Intelligence Team produces ward profiles that show Rochester West and Borstal Ward, which covers the High Street, has the fourth highest rate of crime cases per 1,000 residents in Medway, and Rochester East and Warrenwood Ward, which is adjacent, is the 10th highest, and the highest types of crime is violent crime and antisocial behaviour, both of which are associated with alcohol consumption. And I would like to stress that the concern about these types of crime is still current, as is shown by my additional evidence that Public Health submitted and is included in the first supplementary agenda. These figures and maps are from police.uk, which is the same source as the Business Intelligence team uses, and uses figures directly from Kent Police, and they are accurate. There is a full explanation within the submitted evidence as to the provenance and how this data is obtained and used. Figures and location maps for the 6 months from September 2024 to February 2025 were included, and crimes of violence and sexual offences are still the highest types of crime in and around the area of the High Street, where the premises is located. It's located in Corporation Street, but that's next to the High Street. Antisocial behaviour is the second highest type of reported crime in the old Rochester West Ward. This site still uses the old ward. So. As has already been mentioned, the Rochester Public Spaces Protection Order, or the PSPO, has been introduced due to issues with antisocial behaviour. And this covers the majority of the Rochester SIP area. Again, I've provided a map which can be found on page 38 on the agenda reports pack, so you can see how it's located with reference to the SIP area. To support the CIA, evidence of the impact alcohol consumption has in this area was obtained by Public Health by way of a survey and a focus group. The evidence from the focus group highlighted issues of public drinking during the day, causing alcohol-related problems such as antisocial behaviour, nuisance, intimidation, particularly begging, which is a specific issue along Rochester High Street, and public urination. These issues were linked to the consumption of alcohol from both on and off licensed premises, with residents and business owners describing fighting, noise, antisocial behaviour, public sex acts, and general disturbance. And this is actually supported still by those representations that you've received for this application, which have been made by members of the public who are sitting here. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. Would you like to ask any questions? Yeah?
No questions, Chair.
Panel? Councillor Kemp.
Thank you, Chair. You, Barbara, in your submission, you mentioned quite significantly Rochester High Street, which has an unacceptably high area of antisocial behaviour. However, we're looking at the other side of Corporation Street. Now, would you not accept that Corporation Street is quite an effective barrier?
Fortunately, as is explained within my my evidence pack from the crime data, the location is approximate of that, and that is, I've been very open about it within the submitted data, so I cannot tell you exactly where those crimes have occurred. On more general terms, I wouldn't call Corporation Street a barrier. People walk between the two. I call the barrier maybe the railway line, which is behind Corporation Street, but the cumulative impact policy border, because there has to be a border, because that's what the law requires, runs up Corporation Street for a reason, and that's the reason why it was there.
I mean, Corporation Street is effectively a dual carriageway, which is very busy, and traffic does travel along there at quite a speed. So I would suspect that it is quite a barrier indeed.
Any other members? Okay. Thank you, Barbara. Ms. Tranter, over to you.
Okay, right.
Ms. Tranter, just to let you know, obviously, if you want to refer to Mr. Webb's evidence as well, you can do during this part.
Oh, it's still on. Yes, thank you. I'll start off with making the point that Councillor Kemp made, by the way, thank you, Chair, sorry, that actually there are lots of crossings on Corporation Street for people to be able to get across from that side, and people come to our festivals, come at weekends on the trains, and you can see hordes of them coming across, crossing the road. They do, there are hundreds of them. You can ask any of the train staff there. That is what actually happens. Some of them obviously live behind the railway line, but a lot of them come into the high street. So I'm going to paint a bit of a picture because I'm a Rochester resident of 50 years. If you cut through me like a stick of rock, I've got Rochester going through the centre, and I've been so involved with it. I love it. And I live about 5, 6, depends on how fast I'm walking, 2 minutes on the bike, walk up the road from here. And for the past 10 years, I've been actively involved, volunteering, and members of different societies. And I'm also responsible for having organised all the flower baskets and barrier baskets with the flowers we've fundraised, and the forum has actually provided the money for that. So, and I get a team and we plant them up. Incredible pride in Rochester and how it looks. It's a brilliant place and very beautiful. We're a close community that know each other, and we come together regularly and we discuss, so the businesses know each other, they work together. It is, as Councillor MacDonald said, a very tight community. It's a thriving tourist town, and that's due to the hard work of the businesses. Probably about 90% of them are independent, and it's all the different organisations who put their heart and soul into making this an attractive place. We have the immeasurable support from the council and in all departments, the police and other agencies who work hard to keep this a great place, a safe place for us to live and for people to visit. With that, of course, comes a downside in that it's an attractive place for professional beggars to come And if you go along the high street in the evenings from Thursday onwards, you can get 8, 10 beggars sitting by the cash points. That's why I asked about the cash point, because you will inevitably get people by the station, if you've got a cash point, sitting there asking for money. They're by the cash points and outside some of the restaurants where they know people have got a lot of money. And they do openly ask for money. They're not supposed to. We do occasionally get in touch with the police, but the police, obviously, it's one of those, a fairly small thing, I suppose, in the great scheme of things. So it's a place for professional beggars to come and those who don't have a regard for the area and what locals have worked so hard to put in place. So flowers will get ripped out and you can see general damage. Several years ago, council officers, the police, public health and others saw that it was necessary to put in a SIP. They saw the trends of crime and disorder, which of course are incredibly draining financially to them, but more importantly, the effect that drunken behaviour and all it entails has on the community, making Rochester less attractive to visitors and residents. The SIP is there for a purpose and a reason, and it is working. It does work, and that's what I'm so grateful for, is that the fact that we are able to come together and discuss things, and there have been 1 or 2 sessions where I've sat and actually, as the public, who sometimes feel powerless, we've been listened to, and licences have been changed, or maybe the operator themselves has changed the licence to reflect what the people of Rochester would like. Mark Holton's report and photos taken in the depths of winter and a short window didn't represent what we know and what we experience to be true. Our daily, weekly, monthly experience is that Rochester is thriving and buzzing. It's an attractive, vibrant place to be. Tesco will attract people. There were no bright lights in the photographs that Mr. Holton took when he visited because the area wasn't open, but it will become it's going to upgrade the area. It's going to look great, but it will be busy and it will be a focus for people to go. It will be handy to have, of course, so I'm not against Tesco's, and I hope that you get things like bread and eggs available at all times because the co-op doesn't. So that's something to be working on. But I do believe that an off-sales availability will have an effect. It will have an impact on the high street, not from the responsible drinkers. They're not the issue, but from those who get off the trains and buses and will buy a 4-pack and pass them on to others of something and start drinking before they walk across the road to the high street. Our off-sales premises are all managed by people that own their own businesses, and they are part of our community. They have the community radios, I can't remember what they're called, that are approved of by the police, so that they can communicate when troublesome people are in the area. And they too are trained and have CCTV cameras. Rochester is small, unique, well-tended and loved. We need protection from the accumulation of sales. That's my fear. It's like straws that gradually start to break the camel's back. And that is my plea to you. It's a gradual thing that happens, and the impact is great. So this is about the cumulative impact, and it's to protect us, so please continue to protect us.
Thank you, Ms. Applicant, any questions? Ms. Tranter.
Don't have any questions at all.
Panel? Questions? Okay. Stephen, over to you.
Thank you. I really do recognise Tesco's best practice. You know, I see it when I go into a store and, you know, I see their Challenge 25 policies and, you know, I welcome their investment in the community. You know, it is great to have, you know, jobs being created in our area and I'm grateful for that. But the SIP itself exists and they knew that when they applied. And I really can't understand, and Tesco's will have their reason of why you'd persist if you only want, the hours proposed and 10% of the store with alcohol. Why is it so important that Tesco's has alcohol at this venue? And then what is this actually going to bring to our community if it be granted today in whatever form? Will another licence enhance the area? I don't think it will. I know all of the properties that Sarah mentioned. I know all of the local community. The issues around public health and the division of the dual carriageway. I regularly commute and see glasses, bottles, alcohol paraphernalia that supports everything that public health say. And I've not always agreed with public health, I'll say that for a fact, but I have had urination immediately. This is the buildings next door to this proposed venue. Urinations up the walls, bin stores broken into, vandalism, etc. All, generally, and I am in a position to comment on this, of a professional opinion, that, fueled by alcohol. And I go back round to the point of, we're at a station with 1.72 million passengers coming through there. We have limited BTP, British Transport Police, resources. And Tesco's do make reference that they're at Waterloo, etc. And I'm well aware of the businesses in that vicinity. They have BTP resources at those locations. BTP resources in the Medway area are very light. Response times are very low. Granting sales of alcohol to people with the hours proposed potentially exposes railway staff, other railway users in and out of the station, potentially to the issues that have been raised within all of the objectors' points. I'm not going to make an endless case beyond what I've written. I would urge the panel to read or reread, please, everything that I submitted. I think I laid out quite a balanced reasoning, and I'm happy to take any questions on what I've said.
Thank you, Stephen. Just to reassure you that we have read, and my two members make sure, because I test them on it in the morning they come in, to make sure they've read all the papers.
Councillor, may I just add one thing that I forgot from my notes? The crime statistics that I applied for on the FOI, I know how to make those applications and the question that I asked. And that there is, while I hear from the gentleman from Tesco's, there is obviously some smoke circling around those properties. And, I urge you to consider the information I've provided from them today when you make your considerations.
Thank you, Stephen. Any questions? Jeremy?
Chair, we don't really have questions as such, but I don't know whether it would be helpful if we just made 2 or 3 quick points in response. I don't know whether that's appropriate.
I think you can do that in your summing.
Perfect. We'll do it in the summing up.
To do that. If there's no questions, then that's fine. Panel?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Stephen, for your representations and for your questions as well. They've been actually quite helpful for us. I'm sure, speaking for my colleagues as well, they've been quite helpful to sort of hear from your side of view. I mean, the point that I raised to Tesco, the fact that I'm confident that they're a good company. They take their licensing objectives seriously, promoting them and sort of adhering to them. In your objection, you mentioned, and you made reference as well when you asked the question to the Tesco reps today, you said that you're happy for them to consult with you. You said it in your final paragraph of your objection. What more did you want them to do? What could they have done for you? What measures could they have put in place for you to be happy with the application?
My understanding of the Licensing Act is specifically to promote avoiding being sat here. And until disclosed by the council, I am unaware of what other representations are made. So, in the spirit of the Act, I will always ask, please come and talk to me. And that's what I was doing within that email. And what I wanted to achieve from that is that Tesco could come back and they could hear my perspective, ask questions before we arrived to today, potentially amend their application or consider alternative conditions to propose. I may not or may not have agreed with them, but it would have been, productive community engagement to try and find a way forward. And I'm sure, I'm not going to quote the Act when I haven't got it in front of me, but I'm sure it's in there. And that's why I referenced it.
And I think Councillor MacDonald made a really good point as well when he asked the question and he said about the consultation, and he pulled them up on that exact point. But for me, we're going to make a decision today. We do have the sort of authority to put conditions onto any licence. So, if we were minded to approve it, is there anything that you would like us to include onto that licence? Is there anything that there's not been mentioned today that perhaps you would like to see on that licence?
I have written some extremely substantial premises licences with hundreds of conditions, and that unfortunately, based on the evidence that I collected, the evidence from public health, the evidence that I see daily, that there is nothing as a condition that will allow, in my mind, for a premises licence to be granted there. There is nothing, and like I say, I have experience in this sector. If I could have proposed something, I would have written it in there, because that's what the Act requires me to do so. And I really can't. So, I ask you please to bear that in mind.
Yeah, absolutely fine. And I know it's in the SIP, and I'm a strong believer that we should have this policy. And as I said earlier, happy for any challenge on any of our policies, and that's what it's about, and everybody has the right to do that, and they should do that at appropriate times. But no, thank you for that. Obviously, something for you guys to sort of take away, and you don't want any response to this, but have something that perhaps you should take away from this, and from the point that Councillor MacDonald made, that the community engagement is just key to these applications.
Thank you, Councillor Fern. And just to be clear, Stephen, I did ask the question, and to be fair to the applicant, it's a policy that their head office decided to. You can just do a clarity on it, but it's the policy you've decided to go with of not doing that consultation, heavy-handed consultation, apart from on the representation. Am I correct, Jeremy?
Correct. We used to do it, and we used to get a lot of criticism for it. So, as I say, I hear what's being said, but that's the reason we do it, rightly or wrongly.
But a fair point, Stephen. Thank you. Councillor Kent, do you have anything? No. Okay. So, anything from any other? Nothing from you guys at all? Any clarity issues? Okay. I'm going to ask for summing up now. To you first, Jeremy.
Do I normally go last in these, or
go last? Barbara, to you first.
Okay. So, to sum up, the Licensing and Safety Committee has accepted that Rochester High Street and the surrounding area has unacceptable levels of alcohol-related issues, including crime, public nuisance, associated with, in part, off-licence customers. And the evidence presented to you today shows these problems are current and ongoing and still of concern in the area. Your cumulative impact assessment states, and I quote, "There is a presumption of refusal by the authority unless the applicant can demonstrate the premises will not adversely affect the licensing objectives. And the authority presumes it will refuse this application unless the applicant, and I stress the applicant, shows how the premises will not adversely affect the licensing objectives." I'd also like to, just as a small side thing, refer you to page 29 in your statement of licensing policy. It was raised by Tesco's about ancillary. The term ancillary is defined in your statement of licensing policy, and it doesn't include off-license. Off-license is a separate category within there. Just thought you should know that. So I'd like generally to address how the application tries and, in the opinion of public health, fails to address your requirements. And I would argue it is not clear how the measures outlined in the application from Tesco's will ensure that the sale of alcohol from this premises will not adversely affect and even exacerbate the issues highlighted within the cumulative impact assessment, which are not just about public street drinking or related antisocial behaviour. They're about far more than that. Although this is what the additional evidence supplied by Tesco seems to concentrate on. This premises is an off-licence, and to state the obvious, once alcohol is bought by a customer, the applicant is unable to control how and where the alcohol is consumed and what the effect the consumption has. Nothing in any of the offered measures will ensure people, for example, will not buy alcohol from the shop, drink it in the street, in the high street, away from the shop, and then discard the can or bottle, causing litter, or engage in antisocial behaviour of some description, such as the aggressive begging outlined by Mrs. Tranter. With the best will in the world, street drinkers are not identifiable. People do not go around with a sign over their head saying, I am a street drinker, or I commit domestic abuse. The measures offered may deter alcohol antisocial behaviour in or in the immediate vicinity of the shop, but they will do nothing once the customer is away from the premises, and I would suggest the measures are far more likely to deter shoplifting and intimidation of staff, which is important, but do not stop the other alcohol-related concerns. I'd also like to address the additional evidence supplied by Tesco's. As has been said, it is a 4-day snapshot in February. The SWEP was in place, and actually it had been in place for a considerable amount of time. It was continuous from, if I remember rightly, January through to mid-April this year, every single day. So there wouldn't be a lot of people being swept up by this, excuse the pun. They would already be there. And this evidence cannot be given the same weight as the nearly 7 years of evidence used to support the current SIP, because it is nearly 7 years old. As well as 6 months from September to February that I supplied you showing violence and antisocial behaviour is still the highest type of recorded crime in this area and is still an ongoing issue. So in summary, this is a very typical convenience shop, small supermarket, albeit run by a national well-known company. And that is not to say Tesco's is not responsible. That is not what I'm saying at all. You are, completely. However, that is not the point. The issue is whether the applicant has shown that the sale of alcohol from the shop will not add to the alcohol-related harms in this area, and they have not done this. And this is simply because once the applicant has sold the alcohol to a customer, there is no further supervision regarding the effect that the consumption has. And therefore, the Director of Public Health would ask you to refuse this application.
Thank you very much, Barbara. Ms. Tranter, anything you'd like to sum up with? Just press your microphone, please.
I concur with everything that Barbara has said, and again I would just ask that you would take in regard the CIP for experiential, the experience of Rochester for families, for children, for all the people that walk up and down and want to feel safe, want to feel that this is not be approached by beggars, all those sorts of things. It is about the experience that we have in Rochester that keeps people coming time and time again, providing a lot of money throughout actually the Medway towns. It has that effect. It seeps through. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Stephen, to sum up?
Just a final remark from myself would be that, one more licence is not going to change the free market economy. We have licences in Medway. We have people who've existed for a long time and work with their objectives. Public Health makes a very, very valid point about leaving that property. This is an off licence. That's how I see it. While the Tesco's depend upon 10% of their retail footprint, it will cause issues in the location. It's the locality and the SIP issues are a core issue for me. That railway station and those 1.7 million people really do represent a great commercial opportunity for Tesco's. But in my opinion, I think they should stick to selling food on this particular occasion, and follow the pathway that they have in many other areas where they recognise covenants or other neighbourhoods that are in place where they've not sold alcohol. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stephen. Jeremy, now over to you.
I'm grateful, and thank you to all those making objections to the way that you've done it. Before I sum up, I just want to pick up one point that was made in relation to the definition of ancillary sales. So it's not within the cumulative impact policy. I'm about to get onto that. So we were referenced to page 29 within the main policy. and that's to do with the heading of its Policy 14, premises used for ancillary sales and qualifying clubs. What the definition actually says is very different from what was put to you. This applies to venues where alcohol is ancillary to the main purpose of the premises and where alcohol sales make up a small proportion of the business, and to qualifying clubs. So it's obviously the first bit and not to qualifying clubs. This type of premises may include, and then there's a long list, one of those is internet sales, which is clearly off sales. It then has a further test saying it does not apply to SEVs, hotel bars with public access. It does not exclude off licences, as was suggested to you. That definition is clear. It's anything where the alcohol is not the main part of the business and performs a small part of it. I think the second thing as well I'd just pick up is there are a number of different things around need, or the fact that the application might be absolute, or what was suggested to you is if there was any evidence of alcohol-related harm, then you'd have to refuse that. And it's simply not what your policy says. As has been clearly stated on a number of occasions, which is correct, the policy in its current form, and which is why it says it's less than the Section 182 guidance, is premises that can show they will still continue to promote the licensing objectives should be granted a licence, in essence. There has not been a single person here that has said how Tesco are not going to promote the licensing objectives. There's been lots of comments around the good policies, everything that they're doing in terms of promoting the licensing objectives. What I think is being said to you is that effectively the CIP should be absolute. There should be no more. And that clearly is not how it works. So in terms of this application, what's been put to you, excellent operator. We think this is an incredibly well thought out application. You'll see the rationale behind it on page 31 of your committee papers. We have taken into account all of the relevant policies, all of the relevant evidence. In terms of Mark, I think Mark's been shot at for some things that he hasn't done rather than what he's done. What he clearly is probably one of the most qualified and experienced
Jeremy, can I just pull you up? Mark hasn't been shot at or got at by the panel. You had
not by the panel.
No. But you had full access to ask the objectors questions, and when I handed over to you, you or Mark didn't ask any questions or ask for clarity on them. So can we stick to the summing up point, please?
Will do. So in terms of Mark Holton, you've got a leading expert. You've got his view in terms of the licensing objectives. We entirely agree with you that the police and the other statutory authorities who look after the main licensing objectives are a key part of the cumulative impact policy. They don't object, and the clear logical conclusion of that is they believe that this application be granted and it won't undermine the licensing objectives. It's entirely what we think as well. You've heard evidence about the stats, and when you link it down to the Tesco Express sites, at the high point, that's 75. Some of those even say Tesco it's linked to Tesco, but it's theft elsewhere. So it's not even 75, which roughly works out at just over 1 per month. You heard from Simon in terms of the issues. There are issues within some of the stores. It's not massively problematic, but the overwhelming majority is to do with theft. It's not to do with theft of alcohol or other problems with alcohol, and we manage it well. On top of that, you've heard about all the systems we have. And I have to say, I think Tesco do this better than anyone else in the sector. We have the security guards, we have the hub, we have the local guarding, we have the body cams, we have the CCTV, we have all the other policies. In light of all that, with the hours that have been provided, which consisted with the policy, consisted with some of the reps of the previous application, we think this is a very sensible application that can be granted in line with the policy. And we also note that should any of the harms that are being alleged or said to occur, there is equally the power of review should that need arise. My final point in relation to this is there are lots of points that have been put to you as to what might happen, and there hasn't been any direct link to these premises will actually contribute to specific problems in the future. I'm not undermining, I'm not criticising people for that. It's simply a point that can't be made. There's a case of Thwaites from years and years and years ago that went to the High Court, which said for new applications effectively, it would be very difficult to demonstrate that there would be problems per se. And therefore, in terms of your test, the test is, will this licence application, if granted, undermine the licensing objectives? And we would suggest to you overwhelmingly it wouldn't, and therefore it should be granted. But thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Jeremy, and thank you, everyone here. I just want to say that the panel's we will make a decision, but we're going to do a written decision today. There's a lot to discuss here, so we won't be making the decision asking you to wait for the decision to come back. But we will do a written decision. It's between, I don't want to put words into your, 5 working days will be the decision, and we will get that to you as soon as well. But I want to thank everyone for your attendance today and everyone for their contributions. Thank you very much. Thank you.